Thank you for attending our webinar about Asta Powerproject. My name is Mary Williams and I'm the President of Projects Analytics. We are excited to present a powerful, affordable, easy-to-use option to Primavera P6 and Microsoft Project. Thanks again for attending, and if you like what you see, please share with others. Welcome to our webinar entitled Why Choose Asta Powerproject. My name is Mary Williams. I'm the President of Projects Analytics. Again, thanks for joining us today. Phones are muted to ensure an optimal audio experience for all attendees. We encourage you to submit questions, including your company name and phone number. We will provide a follow-up email with all questions and answers to all attendees. We hope to demonstrate that Asta Powerproject offers strategic functionality at a much lower cost. Our webinar agenda will begin with some introductions. Then we'll view an Asta Powerproject demonstration, and we will recap with a review of pricing and licensing options. My company is Projects Analytics, Inc., and again, my name is Mary Williams. We've been financial management consultants since 1985. We are certified accounting, job cost, estimating, and project control specialists. We are Asta Powerproject and Oracle Primavera partners in the AEC, oil and gas, aerospace, and defense industries. We are also a certified education provider for Oracle University. We have offices in Houston, Tampa, Santa Monica, and Seattle. Elecosoft is the parent company of Asta Powerproject. They've been project, portfolio, resource, and cost management specialists since 1988. 92% of the top UK contractors use Asta Powerproject. Formerly called Asta Development, it has been rebranded to Elecosoft in July of 2015 and has been part of the Elecosoft group of software companies since 2009. Over 75,000 users use Asta Powerproject to manage their projects across 7 languages. Although Asta Powerproject may seem new here in the US, it's been around since 1988, helping project managers, planners, and schedulers manage large, medium, and small-size projects. Here in the U.S., companies like my company, Projects Analytics, provide U.S.-based support, training, and professional services. Here in the U.S., Jim Dawkins is the national manager for Asta Powerproject. It's our objective during this demonstration to show you why you should use Asta Powerproject, and we hope to demonstrate that it is powerful like P6 but easier to use, at a lower cost with concurrent licensing options which have not been available with Primavera for 5 or 6 years. You can include a 4D BIM module within your Asta schedule. You can also include a risk analysis module. Asta Powerproject is one of 3 products approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. So if you are a contractor, you know that you need to submit your schedules to the Army Corps in SDEF format, SDEF. Asta Powerproject has been approved to provide that format. What you'll find is that Asta Powerproject provides a quicker ROI. Not only does it cost less, there's less training and implementation time required. In other words, your users can focus on managing and planning their schedules versus becoming software experts like they may need to do with Primavera P6. You'll also find that you can easily share project plans with other users. You can open an XER file, which is a Primavera P6 file, with Asta Powerproject, and you can save a Powerproject file as an XER file or a Microsoft project file. Easily share plans with users of other tools, and much more. Here are some of our favorite features that are not available in P6, and we will demonstrate this to you in a few minutes. Notice that monthly net cash flow is in bold. With Asta Powerproject, you can track costs and revenue in one schedule file, and therefore you can produce net cash flow reports and histograms. Drag and drop functionality makes Asta Powerproject very easy to use. Multiple activities per line. You can also easily draw relationships, including lag, directly on your bar chart. Asta Powerproject offers superior output, presentation style output using PowerDraw. You also have unlimited undo and redo. Now, why is that important? Well, obviously we all make mistakes, so that's important. But undo and redo also afford you the opportunity to perform what-if analysis directly in your schedule. Another powerful tool not available in P6 are user-defined formulas, just like with Excel, that you can insert as columns on your activity table or spreadsheet. To accomplish that same objective in P6, you need to use a global change statement. Asta Powerproject has many more robust resource, cost, and revenue features than Primavera P6, and unfortunately we can't demonstrate all of those in this short time. We will demonstrate some of the basics, and I think you'll find that they're very powerful. If you have an interest in looking at that further, please contact me at the end of the webinar and we can set up a private demonstration. Okay, we're ready now to launch the Asta Powerproject demonstration and demonstrate how powerful Asta Powerproject is, particularly when compared to Primavera P6.
Okay, let's create our project from scratch using Asta Powerproject. The project that we're going to be working on is going to be an office center, and it's going to consist of two buildings, Building 1 and Building 2. Upon selecting New, you're presented with a list of available templates from which you can create your new project. These templates are out of the box. However, you can either edit those and/or create your own from scratch. The purpose of a template is to speed up the setup of a project as well as to standardize that process across all of your users. Templates can contain your standard data dictionaries, such as resources, calendars, activity codes, your default views or layouts and reports. They can also be very robust and contain a fully resource cost-loaded schedule with relationships and so on. Just depends on what your objective is. The purpose here is to speed up the setup, standardize across users, so that your users don't have to focus on being software experts like they do perhaps in Primavera P6. They can focus more on managing and analyzing their project to ensure on-time, on-budget delivery of projects. I've given my project a name, Office Building, and a start date. I can assign some security to my project. But when I'm done with all of that, now of course I'm going to select a template, I'll click Create. Once I click Create, I'm now in the Home window. And before we actually get started with this project, I'd like to discuss the different components of this window. Over on the left, we can see a project view. The purpose of the project view is to display all of the projects that you're working on, as well as those standard data dictionaries. So here I can see some permanent resources, which are normally labor and equipment, consumable resources such as materials, cost centers, code libraries, which are normally my activity codes, calendars, progress periods. I can even have a default WBS. I can add additional items to the project view depending on how I configure my Asta Powerproject. Moving over to the middle is my standard activity table or spreadsheet. The spreadsheet view contains all of my activities, so each row represents an activity. I can configure the columns that are displayed, as well as how those activities are grouped, sorted, and filtered. So to change columns, it's real simple. I just right-click on a column header and select Add a Column, and I'll see all of the different categories of columns, and I can just simply select the column I need. If I go up to the View menu up above here on the ribbon, I can see all of the various functions that are available, the commands available to customize the appearance of the view. Over to the right is my standard bar chart or Gantt chart view, where I eventually will see progress bars for each one of my activities. I can use the Format ribbon to format the appearance of the bar chart, and we'll be reviewing many of these different functions throughout this webinar. Above the bar chart is the date zone. You might also call it a timescale. Here you can see that we've got 4 date zones. We've got the year, month, week, and then we also see elapsed week. Let me move over here a little bit. Elapsed week means how many weeks have elapsed from my start date. So I can quickly see when I'm managing my project how far into the project I am from that start date based on elapsed weeks. With Asta Powerproject, you can have up to 10 date zones displayed here, depending on your needs. With Primavera, you can only have up to 2 or 3. If you right-click and insert a line, you can see all of the other date zones that are available to you. You can actually take this down to hours and minutes and even seconds, which is not available to you in Primavera P6. Now, normally if you're just working on a construction project, that might not be such a big deal. But if you're working on a maintenance, shutdown, or turnaround type of project, your project literally is managed in terms of hours and minutes and sometimes seconds, because every minute you're late means revenue that's lost for that particular power plant. So anyway, you have the option to have up to 10 of those date zones on your time scale. And if none of those work for you, you can always create a custom date zone. Up above we have our ribbons, and you can see there's a variety of ribbons. I'll just kind of click on those because we will be visiting most of those throughout this webinar. And those ribbons contain commands enabling you to manage your project. Up at the top, if I go to my drop-down list, I can actually minimize that ribbon to open up more real estate on the screen. But for purposes of this webinar, I'm going to leave that displayed so that you can see all of those commands as we work on them. Let's look down below at a couple toggle switches. We have a toggle switch that can toggle the project view. So remember, this is the project view over here to the left. If I click on that toggle switch, it will remove that, and I can click it back and on, off and on, to display the project view or not. And the whole purpose of turning it off is to open up more real estate on the screen for you. I'm going to put it back on for the time being. Another toggle switch of importance is to toggle the properties view. And if I click there, you'll see it brings up what you would normally call your activity detail tabs. Now, if you're used to using Primavera P6, you may get used to entering a lot of your data on the detail tabs, and you can certainly do that with Asta Powerproject. But I think what you'll find is it actually becomes much more efficient to do a lot of that work directly up on the spreadsheet and or the Gantt chart. And hopefully I'm able to demonstrate that to you, that it's very straightforward to just do it up here on the activity table and the Gantt chart. So for purposes of this demonstration, I'm actually going to toggle the display of the details off. Okay, so just to recap, we've created a new project and we've learned about the different components of this window. We've got the project view, we've got the spreadsheet, we've got the bar chart with the date zones, and then we've got our various ribbons up at the top. Now that we've created our project, let's add the activities required to complete the project. There are several different ways to add activities with Asta Powerproject. First of all, you can just come directly into the spreadsheet and type the activities. So I will start with a project milestone, call this project start. And of course that's the start milestone of my entire project. That's a 0 duration. Next, we will go ahead and say that we're going to start design and procurement. That'll be our first major phase of work. And again, that will be a 0 duration. Now, let's talk about a feature that's very unique to Asta Powerproject, and that is called multiple tasks per line. So each row on the spreadsheet is called a line. But I can have multiple activities on that line. So I'm actually going to draw 3 distinct activities. 1, and they're all going to be 10 days duration. 2, 3. And I'm going to call this activity Design the Office. All right. And I can see that all 3 of those activities are going to add up to 30 days duration. Now I want you to watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to expand Design the Office, and you can see that although they can be summarized on one row to compile everything required to design the office, they're all distinctly different activities. And I'm actually going to give them different names. So the first one is going to be Design Floor 2. Now why am I doing that? Well, although I have a scope of work called Design the Office, I may have some distinct components of that office building that I want to track separately for my own purposes, but that I do not need to tell or report to my stakeholder. So first we're going to design floor 2, and then we're also going to include designing a child care center on floor 1 and design a yoga studio on floor 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and collapse that activity again. So you can see that for reporting purposes, in other words, when I report to my stakeholder or perhaps even to executives of my company, I can only report at one level called Design the Office. But for my own internal purposes, I can track them all separately. Now, why would I want to track them separately? Well, perhaps I'm assigning different resources to each activity. Perhaps I'm using different subcontractors, and perhaps I'm using different designers. So summarizing them on one row allows me to report on them together, but still be able to track them separately. So that's a very useful tool with Asta Powerproject. And the example I just used is very, very simple. You can imagine if you're, for example, a production home builder, and you're building many homes in a subdivision. You could literally have each home or each lot represented by one row and see all of the activities required to complete that home. Or maybe just to complete the punch list. But hopefully you get the point here. That's a very useful feature. So for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and collapse and move on. Next, we're going to procure raw materials. And we'll estimate that that will take 20 days. And then once that's all done, we can consider ourselves complete for the design and procurement phase. So I'm going to say design, procurement, complete. And again, because that's a milestone, we'll give it a 0 duration, and we can see it is reflected as a diamond on our Gantt chart. Okay, to recap, I've typed the activities in on the spreadsheet, I've drawn them on the bar chart, I've created multiple tasks per row. Another way to add activities very quickly is to just copy and paste them from Excel. I've got an Excel spreadsheet down below here. I've selected the activities I would like to copy and paste. Very simple, just copy, paste. Now we've got all of our activities that are required to complete this project. Now that we've added our activities, let's discuss the work breakdown structure. With Asta Powerproject, you can either set up your work breakdown structure prior to adding activities or afterwards, depending on your preferences. The work breakdown structure represents the major deliverables we need to produce with this project. So let's start to add our WBS. I'm going to select from Project Start down to Design Procurement Complete, and I'm going to come up to the Home ribbon and select to Summarize. And then I'll just type in the name of that phase of work, Design Procurement. And then I'll select from Start Construction to Form and Pour Slab, and we'll go ahead and call that Site Prep. And then we'll select Framing. So you can see it's very straightforward and very easy to do. We'll install roof decking to dry in, and we'll call that Phase Dry In. And we'll do some exterior finishes. Oops. Call that Exteriors. We'll do some mechanical, electrical. Hopefully you can see how straightforward this is. And I'm just going to go ahead and finish it up here so you can see how it looks when we're done. So we'll select Install Insulation and scroll down to Interior Complete. And we'll call that Interiors. And we'll do some landscaping. And then final acceptance. Now, the WBS that I just created is very simplistic. Many of you will have much more elaborate WBS structures with a much deeper hierarchical levels included. But you could use this same process to do all of that. Now, as a function of adding those WBS elements, I'd like to point out a couple things. First of all, you'll notice that each WBS element also has a corresponding summary bar on the Gantt chart. Additionally, when I look on the project view, I can expand the project and clearly see those WBS elements displayed beneath there. And the unique thing here is that I can click on each one of those to narrow down the activities belonging to those WBS elements. So that's a much more straightforward process than you might need to use with P6. So in P6, when you have a hierarchical structure, in order to narrow it down to just those activities, you need to use expand, collapse, collapse to, or perhaps even using a filter. As you can see here, it's much easier to get to those activities, to isolate and work on those separately, and yet still see them all together as one. I'd like to point one other thing out over here on the bar chart. So as we said, you can clearly see that we have a summary bar for each one of our WBS elements, but you can't really differentiate those very readily from the rest of the activities. So what we'll do next is to see how easy it is to format the appearance of the bars on the Gantt chart. Very simple. I can right-click, select Format the Bar Chart, go to the Tasks tab, and change the appearances. I don't need to have a separate command for every single type of activity. So let's go to the Tasks command and let's say, well, we'd really like to see those as solid. And for the summary tasks, which are our WBS, we want those to clearly stick out. So we're going to make them a different color, and we'll also make those solid. And we'll go ahead and make the milestones solid as well. Click OK, close, and there you can see that now we can differentiate the WBS from the remaining activities. So it's a very straightforward process. As I indicated, you don't need to go to a whole separate window and do a lot of manipulation with different bar commands like you need to do with Primavera P6. I'm going to come back down to the bottom and zoom in a little bit again so you can see this a little bit more clearly. And let's talk about the different features that you can take advantage of here. So if I double click on a progress bar, or I'm sorry, on a summary bar, you'll notice that it does collapse the activities belonging to that bar. I can also accomplish the same objective by going up to the Home ribbon and select Show To Level. So this is analogous to Expand All, Collapse All, or Collapse To. So if I come up here and say Show to Level 1, I'll see all of my deliverables clearly displayed here, depending on however I set up that hierarchical structure. And then I can, say, let's look at level 2, which would then again expand all of my activities completely. So depending on the level of the hierarchy, you would have more options there. But as you can see, it's very straightforward to set up your work breakdown structure. All I did was I highlighted the activities belonging to a particular WBS and selected the Summarize command. Once you've added your activities and established your work breakdown structure, you're then in a position to develop the links or relationships between your activities. This is arguably one of the most important parts of successfully setting up a project because it depicts the sequence in which you decide to perform the work. There are numerous different ways that you can accomplish that with Asta Powerproject, and I hope to show you most of those. So before we get started, I'm going to toggle off the project view temporarily in order to open up some more real estate. So let's toggle that off. With Asta Powerproject, it's very easy to draw the relationships directly on the Gantt chart. I have never been a fan of doing that when using Primavera P6. It's just not as straightforward to do. However, I've become a fan of it using Asta Powerproject. So let's do that first. So let's just do this real quick. I'm going to say, well, once I start my project, I can start design and procurement. And once I establish that milestone, I can actually start the design. All right, so let's talk about drawing relationships between these activities. Obviously, when I put my mouse on the left-hand side of an activity, I will be drawing a start relationship. And when I put my cursor on the right side of an activity, I would be drawing a finish relationship. And you can see how the mouse display changes accordingly. But a very unique feature with Asta Powerproject, in addition to just being able to draw start and finish relationships, is that you can also draw lag. Okay, so we previously said that we had 3 activities to design the office. One was to design floor 1, design a yoga studio, and a child care center. So let's say that we've decided that, once we're about 5 days into the design of the child care center, once we've started designing the child care center, we feel pretty comfortable that we can start to design or procure our raw materials. So I'm going to go to the start of the child care center, and I'm just going to move my mouse over to the right, and you'll see how the mouse position changes. That's how you know you're drawing a relationship with lag. And you can see the little message that pops up that tells you how many days you'll be using. So let's say I'm at 5 days into that activity. 5 days after the start of that activity, I can start to procure raw materials. And obviously, I don't want to finish raw materials until I'm completely done with the design. So I'll draw a finish-to-finish relationship there. And once I'm done with the procurement, I can consider that phase of work complete. And once that is complete, I can actually start to perform my construction activities. So very simple just to draw those relationships. Another feature that's very useful is called link tasks. So let's say that everything in site prep is going to occur in sequential order. So instead of drawing those finish to start relationships, I can just merely highlight them. I'm going to do a shift click and come up to the add delete links command and say that I want to link the tasks. And that will then link those tasks with a finish to start relationship. So again, that can happen very quickly when applicable. Now previously up above we did a start to start relationship with lag. Let's do a finish to start relationship with lag. And let's go to form and pour slabs. So we all know when we're working with concrete that we normally need to allocate a certain number of days to cure the concrete. And on many schedules that delay is depicted as lag. So let's do 7 days of lag. So I'm going to 7 days after I finish forming and pouring the slab. So I'm going to go ahead and select that it's a finish to start relationship. And I'm just going to drag it over to the right. You can see the number of days, 7 days. So 7 days after I've done doing that, I'm going to start to lay the first floor decking. And you can clearly see that lag depicted on the Gantt chart. So if you've ever tried to do that with P6, it's very difficult and it's really hard to detect. And then again, I can just shift click if these activities are going to occur in sequential order, and there you go. I'd like to show you another process. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. Another very efficient method of adding relationships is called link tasks mode. So the example I'm going to use here is not included in this project. It's going to be a process where I'm going to drive to work and I'm going to stop at Starbucks and then I'll finish my drive. In other words, I'm going to start adding my activities in the order in which they'll occur. So let's turn on the link tasks mode. Okay, so I'm just going to draw the activities so that you can see this. I'm not going to take the time to put the descriptions in just so you can see how this would work. So I'm going to start my car and then I'm going to back out of the driveway. I'm going to drive to Starbucks. I'm going to buy my latte. I'm going to finish my drive to work. And then I'm going to go ahead and walk into my office and start my day. So as you can see, it drew finish to start relationships as I was adding those activities. So many of you probably have groups of activities that occur that way. So this makes it very efficient to accomplish two things at once. Add the activity plus establish those relationships. Now I'm going to go back up to Add Delete Links and turn off the Link Tasks mode. Now if you are a person that doesn't like to draw the relationships on the Gantt chart, not to worry. Asta Powerproject has other methods, and you may want to use a combination of those. So remember earlier we learned that there's a toggle down below called Toggle Properties, or in other words, Activity Detail tabs. And when I do that, I will bring up my activity details and you'll see there's a predecessor and successor tab where you can add, remove, or alter or edit any existing relationships. Now I'm going to toggle that off. I can also right click and add a column. So if I select add a column and scroll down to the logic section, you can see that I can also add columns to view predecessors and successors and or to add and edit existing relationships. So as a user, you can pick which item is most fits your methods, or as I indicated, you can use a combination of all of the above. I've opened up another project that has all of the activity relationships previously defined, just to speed this up a little bit. Before we schedule the project, I want to go back to a couple things. So we're going to create an office center. And our office center is going to have two buildings. Building 1, which we've already been working on, and Building 2. And Building 2 is going to be very similar to Building 1, but you can see we haven't added any activities or any WBS or relationships or anything for Building 2. What I would like to discuss is another way to quickly add activities or scope of work to your project. I'm going to come down below and use a feature called Task Pools. If you've previously used P3 or SureTrack, these task pools would have been called fragnets. So fragnets or task pools allow you to predefine scopes of work to make it easier to add that scope of work to a project. So you can use task pools to initially set up a project and or to add more scope, whether the scope is in the form of a change order or some other additional scope. This is very straightforward, and this is not a feature that can be used in P6. P6 lets you set up templates, but it takes a little bit of effort to incorporate activities from a template into a project. Here we're going to drag and drop. So I've highlighted building number 2, and let's just start adding the scopes of work that we would like to include in building 2. So we're going to do some design and engineering. We will do some site prep. We will do framing. We will do dry-in. exterior finishes. Let's see, where's mechanical and electrical? Oops, sorry. Mechanical, electrical. We'll do our interiors, landscaping, and then we'll do our final acceptance. Okay. Here we can see all of those WBS elements. We can see currently that they are summarized up to the WBS, and remember, we can just double click on a WBS and it will expand and allow us to expand and collapse. Or remember, we can also come up to the Home ribbon and expand to all levels. So notice that not only do our task pools include the original estimated durations for each activity as well as the WBS, but notice that we've also incorporated some relationships. So all of our relationships are defined. And if I come over to my project view, I can now expand Building 2 and see all of those WBS elements there as well. So it's another very efficient way to either create a project from scratch and or add additional scopes of work. Now just to add one more statement about this as an example. If you were a production home builder and you were working in a subdivision and you pretty much did cookie cutter homes, in other words, the base house was always the same structure, but the homeowner gets to select options when they purchase a home. So that would be a very good example of task pools. You could even have the base home as a task pool, but you can clearly see how easy it would be to add additional options like a pool, a deck, a tennis court, or whatever to that base house. So very straightforward. Okay, now let's just recap what we've done. We've added our activities, we've added our WBS, we've formatted our Gantt chart a little bit to change the appearance of our activities, and we've quickly added the second building or second project that's going to comprise our office center, and that would be Building 2. Now for purposes of this webinar, we're just going to stick with Building 1. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight Building 1, and here we are. So once we've added all of our activities and all of our relationships, we're now in a position to schedule our project plan. Asta Powerproject utilizes critical path method for scheduling your activities. Critical path means that it's going to calculate your early start and early finish dates using a forward pass, late start and late finish with a backward pass, and of course the difference between those will be your total float. Additionally, using the critical path method allows you to identify what the most critical path is to your project plan. And obviously we know that in order to successfully complete our project on time, we need to focus on that critical path. So let's schedule our project now so we can identify the critical path. So I'm going to come up to my home window and select reschedule or schedule, and again you can just select Shift F9 if it is your preference to use the keyboard, but I will reschedule, making sure I've selected the appropriate date and click OK. I'm going to zoom out to make this easier to view. Alright, so you can clearly see the critical path outlined in red. So if I kind of scroll over, you'll see that your critical path, and you'll also notice that we have a subcritical path. So the subcritical path would be those activities that more than likely have some total float on them. In other words, they may have a little bit of opportunity to slip from their early start date without delaying the end date of the project. So let's move our bar here, and you can see that those activities in the non-critical path do have positive total float. Now I can notice that either by having a column on my table or by seeing the display on my Gantt chart. So let's talk a little bit about formatting the bar chart again. So I'm going to go up to Format. And remember that the Format ribbon has all of the commands necessary to help you quickly change the format of the Gantt chart. And in the middle, you'll notice there's a series of switches where I can quickly turn off certain functions or not. The first one allows me to turn off and on free float display, and then the next one is total float. So I'd like you to look at the activity called Install Bathtubs and Shower Units. You'll see we've got both total float and free float displayed here. So total float is just the single line, free float is the double line. Free float can be very useful to help you establish priorities on your project. Free float is the amount of time an activity's early finish can slide without delaying the early start of its immediate successor. So here we can see we do have some free float on this activity, and we can see that its immediate successor is installation. Now I can also display free float as a column on the table. If I don't want to really view that, I can just quickly toggle that off. I can toggle them both off, free float and total float. But I can assure you that it becomes a lot easier to actually look on the Gantt chart to see that information versus having to go back and forth to the table. It's very difficult to display free float on a P6 schedule. So I find that to be particularly useful here. So we've identified our critical path. And we've also learned how to turn off and on certain displays on the Gantt chart. And if I come back up here, I'm just going to scroll over some of these. I can toggle off free float, total float, the critical path display, progress lines. Now I'd like you to notice that I do have progress lines. I automatically put those on here. These are these colored vertical lines that are eventually going to be our progress reporting periods. I can turn those off if I don't want to display those as I'm still in the planning process. So lots of different switches that make it easy to turn off and on different displays. Once we've scheduled our project and determined the critical path, we may need to perform what-if analysis on our project. That may be based upon feedback from vendors and suppliers, or maybe from our own internal resources, or perhaps even input from the stakeholder. For purposes of this webinar, let's assume that we've gotten some feedback from a supplier that it's really going to take us about 35 days to receive our materials. So I'm going to change the duration to 35 days, and I can see how the progress bar changed accordingly. And to see the impact on our overall project, I need to reschedule the project. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so I can see that my overall duration for the project changed to 215 days, and I can see how my critical path has expanded accordingly. One of the features of Asta Powerproject is very powerful undo and redo. So we just did a what-if analysis. What if it really takes me 35 days to procure raw material versus 20? Maybe I can go to another vendor and get a better delivery date. So we can go up to undo, and I'd like you to watch what happens. I'm going to undo, and that basically removed the schedule calculation, and click it again, and it reverts back to my original duration of 20 days. Now that's very powerful just by itself. As you know, with Primavera P6, you cannot undo a schedule calculation. But what Powerproject has that is not a feature at all in Primavera P6 is redo. So I can click redo, and you'll see how it reverts back to that change from 20 days to 35 days. And then once again, I can undo and go back to the way I originally looked. If I click down on the drop-down list next to undo, I can see all of the functions that I've performed that can be undone. So, very powerful feature to help us perform what-if analysis, and obviously as well to create or correct any mistakes that we may have made. Okay, the default way that we organize our projects for most reporting scenarios is by work breakdown structure. because our WBS represents the deliverables that we're going to produce with this project. But we may have other ways that we need to analyze our project in addition to work breakdown structure. The example I'm going to use is that we're going to subcontract our work, and we'd like to assign subcontractors to our activities so that we can group, sort, filter our activity view based on those activity codes. Very simple with Asta Powerproject. On the project view, there's a section called Code Libraries. Those are activity codes. They're called code libraries in Asta Powerproject. We've got 4 activity codes: area, floor level, and I can expand floor level and see that it has been built in a hierarchical manner. We've got phase, and we've got subcontractor. I'll expand subcontractor and see the set of all subcontractors in my data dictionary. Notice that you can also see how the activity progress bar will change or be displayed based upon the subcontractor assigned. Let's assign subcontractors now. Super simple process. I use drag and drop. I can use drag and drop on any of these data dictionaries that are available on my progress view. So it makes it very straightforward to just assign values to one or more activities at the same time. I'm going to assign Williams Design to all of the activities in my Design and Procurement WBS. So I'll select them and then drag and drop, and I'll see how those activities, how the display of those activities has changed accordingly. Let's move on to Site Prep. To Framing. Moving down to Dry In, we'll select the roofer. We'll go to Exteriors, assign the bricklayer, do some mechanical, got our interiors, make that the carpenter. Get rid of that activity I accidentally added. And then of course we've got some landscaping to finish up. So you can see all of my activities now appear based upon the subcontractor that we assigned. Now here's the beauty of this. If I go up to File and I do a Print Preview, I can see that the reports display accordingly. All of my activities reflect the subcontractor that's been assigned, and of course I've got a legend down below. Now, if I don't want to view the subcontractor or have my tasks appear based on the subcontractor, I can just right-click on the subcontractor code library and untoggle to display that, and I revert to my original display. And what's beautiful about this is that if I go back to the print preview, it changes accordingly also back to the original display. Now I'm going to toggle that back on temporarily. So part of the beauty of this then is that my activities will display based on the subcontractor assigned. That is a very difficult task to accomplish with Primavera P6. It involves creating a lot of bar commands with filters. So we would have a bar command for every subcontractor, and that bar would also have to have a specific filter associated with that bar to narrow it down to a particular subcontractor. It's basically almost unfeasible to do with the standard bar chart formatting. But as you can see, it's very easy to do with Asta Powerproject. Now let's say, well, I also would like to assign floor level to my activities. So that's a different activity code. So let me temporarily remove the display library of subcontractor, and let's go to floor level. And let's say I'm going to assign a floor level to all of the activities under site prep, and I'll just make it be the ground floor. So now my activities are displaying based on the ground floor. And again, if I go to my print preview, that will translate to my reports. So I can quickly toggle back and forth. And again, as I just described, that would take a lot of work in Primavera P6. Now let's revert back to Subcontractor as the display library. In addition to displaying activities based on the subcontractor or based on the activity code, I can change the activity table to group, sort, and filter based on the activity code. Let's go up to the View ribbon and select Group and Sort. We'll come down to the category called Codes, and we'll select to group by trade contractor. Now we're grouping based on the subcontractor. And of course you can change the way these grouping bands appear, so I'll just quickly change the color from tan to some other more attractive color by going to Properties and just quickly changing it to something that might be a little bit more attractive. Okay, and then come backing up to Group and Sort, I can revert back to natural order. Let's talk about filters. So the purpose of a filter is to narrow down the activities that are displayed to help us focus on those activities. Now, as it relates to subcontractors, I may need to narrow it down to focus on those activities for a particular subcontractor, and/or I might like to create a report for every subcontractor so they know when they need to be on the job site. So let's go up to Filter. And you'll notice that we also have filter categories like we had group and sort categories. And let's go to the filter category called Codes. And we're going to select the filter called Which Code. And what you'll find here is that we can set up filters that prompt us to pick the code and then the corresponding value. So if I want to have a filter based on the subcontractor activity code, I can expand subcontractor and pick which subcontractor I would like to narrow it down to, or multiples, and click Finish. Very quick and easy to do, and then again that would translate to reports. That would take a lot of time. I would need to have a separate filter statements for every single subcontractor in P6 in order to achieve this result. And then, taking that a step further, remember that when you're prompted to put which code, you can flip it to a different code. So let's say I don't want it to be based on subcontractor, I want it to be based on floor level, and I only want to see those assigned to the ground floor. Okay, and so now we've done that very quickly. So very straightforward. You could save a lot of time using that feature versus having to create separate individual filter statements. And again, that all goes to the concept that you're trying to improve the ability of your project managers, planners, and schedulers, improve their ability to manage the project versus requiring them to be software experts. Now, for purposes of this webinar, I'm going to revert back to my regular display, and I'm going to go ahead and take that filter off. So now I'm back to the way I was. Features such as using activity codes, group, sort, filter activity codes, and various other codes allow you to communicate information more effectively not only to your internal team members, but also to external stakeholders of the project. An additional feature of Asta Powerproject to support that process is the use of annotations on the bar chart. On the Format ribbon over to the right, you can see we can insert text annotations, objects, picture annotations. The added functionality that Asta Powerproject has versus Primavera P6 is that in addition to associating a text box or a picture, you can associate a filter to designate when that particular annotation will appear. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to right-click on Start Construction Milestone, and I'm going to progress it to 100%. And you'll notice upon doing that the text box has displayed. So that text box, first of all, has been attached to that activity, and I could have attached it to more than one activity. But more importantly, it only displays when the activity has been progressed to 100%. How did I do that? Let's click there and look at the properties. First of all, I can change the background color and the font. But the more important part is I can associate a filter with the appearance of that annotation. I indicated that I wanted it to be based upon the progress of that activity and only display when the activity's been completed. But you can see that there's a lot of other filters that you could use to govern the appearance of that text annotation. So like I say, Primavera P6 allows you to put an annotation onto your bar chart, but you cannot assign filters like that to govern when it appears. Now let's scroll down and look at this from another perspective, and that would be a picture annotation, which you cannot do on P6. So if I right-click on my Finish Project milestone and progress it to 100%, you'll notice that now I've got a picture of my office building as it's complete. So once again, this gives me complete ability to communicate this information very readily directly on the Gantt chart. This also has particular significance whenever you encounter a delay on your project. So let's assume there might be a hurricane delay or a snow delay or an earthquake delay. And that delay has resulted in delaying a lot of activities, maybe even delaying activities on the critical path. And you want to clearly demonstrate on your Gantt chart why that occurred. Well, that's where using a text box and/or picture annotations and associating it directly with those activities would support your efforts to help you clearly communicate that to your project team members. Now that we've created our deliverables and the activities required to complete the deliverables, and we've established our critical path, we're now ready to start assigning resources to perform the work. Asta Powerproject supports two major types of resources, and we can see those visible over here on the project view. Permanent resources are labor and equipment. Consumable resources are materials. And then we'll also notice that we have a feature called allocation groups, which allow you to build crews and allocate multiple resources at the same time. That feature is not available in P6. Let's learn how to assign resources. First of all, I can just drag and drop, just as I did with activity codes. So I can drag and drop architects over to design the house. And if I turn on my display allocations, you'll notice that I've got an allocation bar for each resource that's been assigned to this activity, where I can see who the resource is, in this example architects, and see how long they're scheduled to work on that activity. And I can use that toggle switch to turn that off and on. Let's look at another way to add activities. Let's open up a different view. View, and I'm going to open up a view called Resource Entry. Notice I have two views or layouts open at the same time, each presenting different types of information about my project. The first one is showing me the structure of the project and the schedule. The second is strictly designed to support the process of managing and analyzing resources. So let's focus on the exterior finishes activity. So let me go to those activities and make those obvious to you. So notice that the layout has several columns prompting us to add resources. So I literally could come to a column for bricklayers and just type in how many I need. So for example, to complete exterior work, I'm going to say I need 2 bricklayers, and I want you to see what happens. Immediately, I receive a message or a warning that I'm over-allocating this resource, and that's based upon not only this project, but across all projects. So across all of my projects, I have over-allocated bricklayers. Also notice down below, I've got a histogram for bricklayers, and I can clearly see I'm over-allocated there as well. Let's do the same thing for carpenters. I'll say I need 2 carpenters, and I get the same message or warning that I'm over-allocated. In P6, you never receive a message that you're overallocating. You have to dig down deep to identify which resources are overallocated. And the way that you would do that is you would open up a resource usage profile and click on every resource to determine who was overallocated or not. Here you receive a warning immediately as well as an immediate feedback with the histogram. I would like you to also notice that you do have your allocation bars on this Gantt chart, and you can see which resources have been assigned. And just like we did on the previous layout, you can toggle that off and on. Now let's use another feature, and that is the allocation group, also known as a crew. I'm going to drag and drop the crew onto complete exterior siding. I'm just going to drag and drop. And again, I'm getting my overallocation message. But here I can see that that crew that's been assigned to complete exterior siding consists of 2 carpenters and 2 bricklayers. And again, I can see the allocation bars over on the right on the Gantt chart. So all of that can be displayed on the Gantt chart or not if I turn off the switch. And again, we've got our histograms down below. We've got a histogram for bricklayers, for carpenters, and then a stacked histogram for all of the resources that we've assigned in this layout. The histograms down below are very straightforward to create. Let's focus on bricklayers. If you click on the drop-down list, you can select which resource or multiple resources for which you'd like to display the histogram. You can pick which information you would like to display. Most of these are out of the box, but notice you can create your own, and you can also format those. Okay, so we've added some resources. Let's now talk about cost information. So let's open up another view called Cost Info. And notice now I've got 3 layouts open. One with the structure of the project and the schedule itself, one showing me my resources, and the next my costs. It's really a wonderful feature of Asta Powerproject. Now for the time being, I'm going to toggle off my project view on this layout to open up more real estate. Let's talk about a couple things here on this layout. First of all, I've got my activity table. Notice the costs that we've got, or I'm sorry, the columns. We've got a column for all costs, and let's look at what comprises that. Remember we assigned an architect to design the house? There's our $4,000 for cost. And then if we scroll down to the brick information, we'll see that reflected there as well as a function of assigning our resources. And if we go to our Format Bar Chart ribbon and turn on our allocations, we'll actually be able to see all of the resources and their corresponding cost. So we have a column for costs. That's very straightforward, but I'd like you to also notice you've got a column for income. So Asta Powerproject allows you to track both costs, income, and net cash flow. All of that within one project, and it's already out of the box set up to do that. And as a function of doing that, I can see the cost for every resource as well as the income that that resource will bring in and the net cash flow or net income. Okay, and you can see that for every resource, rolling up to the activity to summarize there, rolling up to the WBS, and then of course rolling all the way up to the top. So currently my project is scheduled to have $24,000 worth of cost, $36,000 in sum for income, and my net cash flow or net income is $12,800. Now in addition to having your costs derived from resource entry, you can just merely enter costs. So if I come across here to design the house and scroll across a bit, I can actually just literally type information in here. So let's say $1,200. And now I can see my cost components displayed on the table, and I can see that my summaries have changed accordingly. Now let's move our vertical bar over a bit and let's talk about a couple other things. So in addition to displaying that information on the table, once again, you can display histograms. So notice I've got a histogram to reflect my project costs, and again I can pick and choose what I want that histogram to represent. And here's my income associated with that. So here's my monthly income. And then directly below that are my costs. And again, I can pick and choose what comprises that and a corresponding histogram. And then I can see my net cash flow. So here I can see my net cash flow displayed. Additionally, if I drag my vertical bar to the right, I have the ability to create user-defined formulas. Now, first of all, P6 no way can show you net cash flow out of the box. You would have to jerry-rig it in order to do that. So when you use P6, you either have to say I'm tracking costs or I'm tracking income. So here you can clearly see you've got both of those as well as net income or net cash flow. Also want you to notice I've got a user-defined formula, and it's a simple formula. It's just cost plus 10% overhead. And all it's doing is taking my costs and adding 10% to it. So it's a very simple formula. Now, how did I create that formula? In my Explorer window, I went to Formulas. And here I can see all of the formulas, and here's the one I created. And you can see the purpose of the formula as well as the syntax associated with the formula. And as I indicated, mine's pretty simple. If I double click on the formula, I can bring up the syntax. And you can see I can insert symbols, functions, fields, and objects. Now, let me back out of that for a second. That automatically calculates. I don't have to run any special global change utilities or anything like that. As soon as I create the formula and I insert it here as a column, it's creating that or calculating that immediately. I just right click on the column and say I'm going to add a column and scroll down to my formulas and add the corresponding formula that I need. So again, it just makes it a lot easier for you to analyze, manage your data without having to run a lot of special utilities or set up special security permissions or require your users to be software experts. So we've added resources, we've added costs. Now that we've resource loaded and cost loaded our schedule, let's make an assumption that we've optimized our project plan. We're going to create our baseline now. Now remember, baselines are basically just a snapshot of your project at a particular point in time, and the purpose of a baseline is to help you assess your performance against that target. So I'm going to close down two of these layouts and go back to the original one that we worked on. Notice that we've got black bars beneath our activities. That represents our baseline. The baseline was created by going to the Project menu and selecting Baseline Manager. Here I can have unlimited baselines, and I can control the appearance of those baselines. Hence mine is black. Using the Format Bar Chart ribbon, I can toggle off and on the display of those baseline bars. So remember these switches we've been looking at? One of them pertains to baselines, so I can click easily to turn it off and on. Again, that's much simpler than what you might encounter when you're using P6. In P6, you would need to edit the layout, save the layout back and forth if you wanted to toggle that display off and on. So we've created our baseline. Now we're in a position to actually start statusing our project plan with actual performance. In order to update our project with actual work performed, I've opened up a new view, Progress View. Notice the columns that we're prompting: actual start, actual finish, duration remaining, % complete, and then planned % complete. Planned % complete is not an entry column. It is reflecting where we should be at a particular point in time if everything were going according to the baseline. And then we've got a finish variance. I'm going to move my vertical split bar over for a second. So we all know that when we update our project with actuals, we're updating as of a particular point in time, and that point in time is called the data date. Currently, my data date is the project start. To advance that data date, I can double click on it and just change the date, advance it to my new data date. So I'm going to advance it temporarily to August 31st, and you'll see how that date moves. So as I move through my project, that single vertical bar can move forward as well to denote my current reporting cycle. That's the way you do it in P6, and that's the only way you can do it in P6. But with Asta Powerproject, you can incorporate what are called multiple progress periods. So I'm going to undo and discuss multiple progress periods. On my project view, you'll see there's a section called Progress Periods. Notice I've set up or predefined my expected reporting cycles. Let's say that I'm ready now to progress my project as of month 2. So I'll right-click and make that the progress entry period. And I'd like you to notice what happens. Notice that I no longer have the black vertical line. I now have a red vertical line to denote my new data date, which is month 2. So each one of your progress entry periods can have a corresponding color. And you'll see why that's important. Now let's look where we should be at this point in time if everything went according to plan. So we should be 100% complete for pretty much everything except for excavation. Now I could type in all of that information, but I'm going to show you a more efficient way if things for the most part did go according to plan. So I'm going to highlight all of those activities up through excavation. And I'm going to use that same drag and drop functionality. So I'm going to take month 2 from my progress entry periods and just deposit it directly on those selected activities. And here you can see that the portion of the activity that was completed in the reporting cycle is shaded in red and corresponds to the color of that data date. Now briefly, I'm going to turn off the display of the baseline bars. All right. Now, let's make a couple nuances here. Let's say that site prep, yes, it did finish, but it finished late. So I'm going to say it finished on 10/15 versus October 12th. And that delayed the start of excavation until the 16th. And I'm really not 90% of the way through. I'm really only 75%. And I've got 10 more days of work to complete, because we had a storm, a hurricane, an earthquake, something like that, that caused a delay, plus also caused site damage. So let's move over and let's check this out. Let's look at what's happened on our Gantt chart. First of all, we said that we started construction, and remember we had the text annotation to denote that that occurred. Remember that text annotation had a filter on it that only would display when the percent of completion was 100%. And then notice excavation. A portion of the work was completed in this reporting cycle, and then here's the remaining work. Let's reforecast our schedule with the new data date and see the impact. Notice how it knows the new data date because I established that as my progress entry period. All right. So let's put our baseline bars back on and see what's happened. So we can clearly see the deviation starting to occur. We can see that site prep, although it started on time, took later than expected, took longer than expected. That delayed the start of excavation. Excavation is going to take longer because of the weather effect. Now I would probably want to annotate that with some text. So I'm going to put a text annotation on there where I can record what the delay may have been, so that when I print my Gantt chart and distribute this to my project team, they can quickly see that information and have an explanation. And remember from earlier on in the webinar, I also said that you could attach a picture to that to show the site damage. So we're currently looking at all of the work easily highlighted that occurred during my first reporting cycle. So once we've finished updating for the first reporting cycle, we can now advance to the next reporting cycle, which would be month 4. Let's toggle off the project view, and let's just use the features on the Home ribbon to enter progress. So I'll toggle off the project view. And now I'll come up and advance to month 4. Upon doing that, I'll see a new data date displayed representing month 4, and you can see it's lime green. So once again, if I highlight an activity and I want to enter progress, I can do it automatically as I displayed when we were updating through month 2, or I can use a drop-down list on the home window to select a predefined % complete, or I can use Enter Progress and select an option called Enter Progress. And if I click there, it brings up a table allowing me to enter information about that specific activity. I'm going to progress like we did before. So if I scroll down, I can see all of the activities that should have been completed in this second reporting cycle, which is month 4. So I'll go ahead and shift click to select those, and I will enter progress up to month 4. And upon doing that, I can see which portion of the activity progressed during month 4 versus in my first reporting cycle, which is month 2. Now, if I go up to the Format Bar Chart command, just want you to remember that you can use these switches to turn off and on certain features. If I don't want to see the shading, the progress shading, I can easily turn that off or on. And remember, I can turn the baselines off and on. I'm going back to the home window. So we've updated our project as of month 4. Let's move on and do one more reporting cycle, and that would be month 6. So I'll go ahead and change my reporting cycle to month 6, and you'll see now that my data date is reflected with a blue vertical line. And once again, I can just shift click to select the activities that should have had work performed, and I'm just going to enter progress up to month 6. And again, I can see the shading that corresponds to that data date. So hopefully you're able to see that using these multiple progress periods really provides a lot of information directly on the Gantt chart as to which portion of work was performed in which reporting cycle. And that can have huge implications when you get into litigation and trying to dig yourself out of a claim. One last thing I would like to discuss here, if I scroll back down to the very last activity, which was our project finish milestone, is remember we had the picture annotation, which was only going to display when that milestone was complete. So let's just, for the heck of it, finish that milestone, and we can see that now we have a picture of our completed office building. And of course, all of this information translates to the reports that you need to print, to make it very easy to communicate to your project team as well as your stakeholders and explain how your project has progressed. This concludes the demonstration portion of Asta Powerproject, and hopefully we've been able to demonstrate some compelling reasons as to why people are moving from P6 or Microsoft Project to Asta Powerproject. It's as powerful as P6, easier to use, and much more affordable, as you'll see as we progress through the last few PowerPoint slides.
Now that we've concluded the demonstration portion of our webinar, I would like to recap with a slide showing the entire Asta Powerproject suite. So we've been looking at Asta Powerproject, but there's Asta Powerproject BIM, Enterprise, Asta Site Control, Web Access, Timesheet, Risk Analysis, Project Comparison, which is similar to Claim Digger in functionality, and Business Intelligence. Again, if you have an interest in those, please let me know at the conclusion of the webinar. Let's also review the pricing and licensing. Asta Powerproject is available as a named user license. The license itself is $14.95. Annual support and maintenance is $2.99 for a total of $17.94. As we indicated, you can also purchase a concurrent license, which is $19.95 and $3.99 for annual support and maintenance for a cost of $2,394. We are offering a quick start program where if you purchase by September 18th, you can receive 1 day of virtual training at no charge. And I'd like to emphasize that we want you as a reference. Here's my contact info, and I'll let that sit here for just a second so that you can write it down in case you would like to contact me. Again, thank you very much for attending our webinar. Hopefully we were able to demonstrate why you should choose Asta Powerproject. Thanks again.